You done with
Uh,
Okay.
there we go.
All right.
Um, sorry about that, guys.
No problem.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome. Welcome. So, today I wanted to share with you all a little bit about documentation, um, and being a birth doula. So, so with this call, my hopes were to go over doula agreement of services or contracts, essentially. What are some foundational pieces you want to include in your doula practice contract? And the same with client intake forms. So once you are able to connect with a client to provide doula services and they've signed a contract, what other information do you want to gather about them? And if we have some time, extra time, we can talk about prenatal visits and some last minute tips and takeaways. So before we get started, I wanted to hear from you both. How has your doula journey been so far? And what are you hoping to take away from today?
My doula journey has been just getting started. I think I told you, Chantel, but I know I told Kayana. I do have a client, and like she's early in her early stages, and I chose to like take her on. She's like a friend of a family friend, but I chose to take her on so that I can have like time to like figure out the kinks of how I want to structure and run my business and whatnot. Um, so I kind of like did like an intro um text call with her, but I haven't done like the intake form. I sent it to her, but she hasn't filled it out yet. So I'm trying to see, but I'm checking up on her, seeing how she's doing, and I kind of like started asking her like, are there any like resources that you think that you might need that I can start looking and helping you with?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, the business side. It's been not a difficult journey, but like, getting working out the kinks. So I think I set my business up account today, but I was also decided to do the provider role instead of the individual for Mass Health. So going through that process was, different than what we were doing.
Hmm.
But they're very supportive and helpful. So just getting through that. It's
Okay.
good. And then take away from the session. Yeah, I think that contracts are very important. So I hope that I can kind of get idea um of how to structure mine, um and then whatever I learn or don't learn, I hope to add.
Hmm. Well, good. I know I'm really impressed. You guys are off and running with starting your own doula journey. So I'm excited for you. And I'm you're asking such good questions, things we've been talking about kind of offline.
Hmm.
So I'm hoping that today all the things we talk about are going to just complement what you're already doing and help to improve what you've already started.
Hmm.
Um, are you able to talk, Kiana, or do you want to just?
Yeah, I
Okay.
just parked. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, it took a little while to figure out what direction I actually want to do, but I decided um to also just start an LLC. Um, so that's been good, getting the business up and running. I took on my first client as a backup to get my feet wet, and I realized I always felt like I was leaning more towards postpartum, but then I realized I'm like, oh my gosh, I really like the postpartum, like the one-on-one with the baby and just the mom and like the family. I'm just supporting the family really. Um, so now I'm diving into like the birth, and I'm like, okay, what are some things I should really be focusing on, especially with the contract? I
Mm-hmm.
looked online, and people do it differently.
Yes.
So I'm like, what are the basics and like the must-haves? Um, that would be helpful for me. So I'm hoping to just learn that and to learn more about like the intake process with a client. So
Great. Okay, well, that's good to know. So what I'm going to talk about today revolves quite a bit around birth doulas. Um, so I am not a postpartum doula. I don't have a postpartum doula contract. However, some of these key items are still transferable, whether you're doing birth or postpartum. Um, uh, so I, I want to start out with the agreement of services or contracts as you do your doula work. Um, I, I what I find is very common among doulas, especially those who are just starting, is that they may say, "Oh, well, I have a friend, I have a family member, and I was supporting them, and I didn't realize I was a doula. We just kind of had this handshake deal, and I supported them." Handshake deals are all well and good. Don't get me wrong. But as a professional, which, as a professional doula, um, running a professional business, I encourage you to fold in contracts. Only because if it's not in writing, it never happened at all, right? It never happened at all. And contracts are a legally binding document between you and your clients. So, this is a tool for you to use to make sure that you and your client are on the same page, right? Because the last thing you want to do is set up your experience to do your doulaing, and there can be unmet expectations where, well, I thought on call meant XYZ, and you could say, oh, no, that's not what on call meant. Check my contract. On call meant XYZ. So that's just an example. um, um, and contracts are there to protect you, right? You want to be a doula, provide excellent doula services, but you also want to legally protect yourself. Um, because the truth is, litigation is real. Litigation is real. And so having your contracts can keep you in your lane and keep your clients' expectations in lane, if that makes sense. Yeah.
thank you. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what are some things you should include in your contract? So here are some foundational pieces. You want to include a definition of your services. It sounds pretty basic, right? But it's very important that you explain what your role is as a doula, right? Um, you want to explain your obligations, what you are promising to your client. And you also want to include things that you don't do, your limits, because doulas don't wear all hats, right? We're not all things to all people. We have a very specific role. So your contract should outline your limits or boundaries, right? Of where your work begins and where your work as a doula ends. You want to include special circumstances because, life happens. What's going to happen if there is a special circumstance? Not that you're planning to fail, but what if plans need to shift? So having it in your contract, you can outline expectations of what paths you would take should things shift, should circumstances shift. And then you want to include terms of agreement or cost, right? So I know you all want to get paid. You want to be paid for your time, for your efforts. So your contract should have a piece of payment folded in there. And then other supporting documents that might go along with your contract. So let's dive into the first topic. So a definition of a doula or postpartum doula. So I say this because, or putting a definition in your contract is important. Um, my hope is that when you have a consultation with your client, that you're already talking about the role of a doula. But it should be in paper, right? Written down what your role is. And so this is a time for you to outline, what does informational support look like? What does physical support as a doula look like? What does advocacy look like? Advocacy can be kind of a buzzword or trigger word, and that advocacy could mean different things to different people. So in your contract, outlining how you advocate is important too. And then emotional support. As doulas, we are there to support our clients emotionally, and to come alongside them, to validate their feelings. What exactly does emotional support look like? Some clients may assume that you're a licensed clinical therapist, but no, I'm not a licensed clinical therapist. I can hold your hand while you cry. I'm here to bounce some things off of, ideas or emotions off of you, off of me as your doula. But where do you draw the line of where your emotional support begins and ends? And then you want to talk about where your limits to practice. So things that you do not do, right? So let's talk about doula obligations. Some things to think about as part of your obligations as a doula would be communication, right? What promises can you make when it comes to communication? Or when do you want to be communicated to? Like for example, after your client has a prenatal visit with their provider, are you expecting some type of a communication with them? Are you available at 2 a.m. if it's not an emergency, right? This is where you can set some clear boundaries on communication and even modes of communication. Is this text? Is this email? Um, is it a phone call? If you have a client who wants to communicate by email, if you're dealing with a timely situation, when would an email not be appropriate? As crazy as it sounds to put that in writing, it truly is. I had one client who I almost missed their birth, but they send me an email saying they're at the hospital, and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I woke up and I was able to catch that email chime. And I checked and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, why are they emailing me that they're in the hospital? That I should get a phone call. Um, so communication expectations is definitely something you want to include in your contract. Um, Doula obligations should also include how many visits they should expect from you prenatally and in the postpartum. Or if you're just doing postpartum, what are your number of visits look like? Are you, as a birth doula, going to meet with them one time, two times, three times, one time virtually, two times in person? Or one time virtually, one time in person, one time at a prenatal appointment with their doctor, right? So you can list out what you are able to do, what you're obligated to do or promising to do as their doula. And for postpartum, this is where you can outline, are you providing daytime support, nighttime support, and what do your time frames look like? Or are these, 2-hour blocks, 3-hour blocks, 4-hour blocks? Being very specific on the number of appointments and what they can expect in those appointments. Next, you want to, what do you plan on discussing during your appointments? You don't have to go in too much detail on this, I suppose, but giving your client a general outline of what they can expect. So I can speak from my experience as a doula. And our first meeting is kind of a time to talk about birth options. So we'll go over birth planning. Our second meeting, we'll talk about the process of labor and what to expect in a hospital birth. And then our third visit, closer to their due date, will be comfort measures and postpartum planning and lactation or feeding your baby support. So I outline that in my contract so they can have a general idea. So if we're in our first meeting and they say, oh, well, I want to talk about pushing, push positions for pushing. And I say, yes, I'm so excited you want to talk about that. We're going to be discussing this as you get closer to our third visit when we're going to dive in more detail about movement in labor. That's just an example. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
You also want to include um, what what can they expect during your birth or during their birth? What does birth support look like? So we know birth can happen at any moment, right? And sometimes you need a calendar for birth and not a watch. So what's going to happen if you have a birth that's prolonged over several hours or several days? This is where you want to communicate your expectations and your limits, because we're human too. Doulas are human. We need to rest, we need to eat, we need to hydrate. We have families and we have life obligations. Um, so this is where you want to outline your boundaries of when you can or how long you can commit to being a birth or supporting them during their birth. Because at a certain amount of time, you're going to be useless. If you're awake for over 24 hours supporting a birth, by that time you're in a daze, you're not fresh. So this is where you want to communicate your limits. And that kind of also rolls into backup doula support. Um, Truthfully, being a doula takes community. Doulas need doulas. So have a backup doula. Have a backup to the backup doula if you can. Because like I said, life happens. What's gonna happen if, you reach that 24-hour mark and she's still at 4 centimeters, -2 station. Like that baby's not coming anytime soon. So this is where you want to outline expectations on doula support or backup doula support. And if a backup doula is going to be folded into your practice. um, and when do you go on call for their birth? So in outlining what on call means, right? So most doulas will go on call for birth right around the term mark. So 37 weeks, maybe 38 weeks. Um, so outlining when your client can expect you to go on call. So whether it is 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, can they give you that call? And the expectation is that you're prepared and ready to support them. Um, any questions on doula obligations?
No, this was clear. Thanks so much.
I think I have a question. So, okay. So what does person include? You expect, okay. So like as far as like, okay, yeah, as far as communication, like what have you found like effective as far as like whether it just they need like emotional support that's I wouldn't say that's not necessarily an emergency, but if they just want to like talk about something that's happening, are you telling them that they're getting, to send you a message and then you'll get back to them within, 24 hours? Are you saying that you're not available at 2 a.m.?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So how I communicate expectations on communication is if it's urgent, like if they're going to the hospital because there's an emergency, whether they are in labor or not in labor or term or not in term, to just call. flat
Hmm.
up old-fashioned dial on a telephone call, ring, 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 phone call.
Yeah.
Um, if they have a question, but it's not urgent and they don't need an answer right away, I say if you're okay with me getting back to you in 2 to 3 hours, send a text. Send a
Hmm.
text. So if it's like, oh, I was up last night looking on Instagram and I saw this post on Pitocin and I have some questions. Like, that's not an emergency. Don't call me at 2 a.m. talking about some Pitocin, okay? We can talk about that during daytime hours so I can rest, right? Right.
Right.
Um, if they if it's not urgent, not that important, and they don't mind getting back with me or they don't mind a response in maybe 1 to 2 days, then I said send an email, right? Send an email. Um, for example, like let's say we had our prenatal appointment. We talked about birth options. I sent them some birth plan templates. They put their birth plan together and they're nowhere near term. So they emailed me the birth plan. And I said, "Great, I'll respond a day later. Thank you for sending your email. Let's talk more about this, at our next appointment, or here are some things I noticed on your birth plan. Do you want to talk more about it?" So if it's not urgent, it's not super, super important, send an email. Does that answer your
Yeah.
question?
Yep, it does.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay, so limits to practice. So, as doulas, we can't do everything. We just can't. Doulas are non-clinical support people. So even if you have a clinical background, um, you want to be clear with your client on what hat you plan on wearing, um, and plan appropriately. But doulas don't do any clinical tasks. So you're not doing vaginal exams, you're not checking blood pressure, you're not listening to baby's heartbeat, you're not even palpating their belly, you're not making any diagnoses, nothing like that. That's all tasks for their doctor. So it's important to communicate that to your client and encourage them to have conversations with their doctor if they have clinical questions. I always put that disclaimer in there. I'm happy to send you resources, but please talk to your doctor because they have a more comprehensive view of your health, right? And then we have transportation guidelines. So this is a limit, or for some doulas, it is a limit. So depending on how you decide to practice, you want to throw in transportation guidelines. Most doulas do not provide transportation to and from appointments, just for liability reasons. Transporting in someone in the car comes with a risk. So if you do not want to assume that risk as a doula, then you want to be very clear on transportation. Um, does that mean you can help them set up an Uber ride? That's up to you. Like you may not be able to drive them, but can you help them set up an Uber ride? Okay, put that in your contract, put that language in there. Or not saying, I don't provide transportation and I don't help you arrange it, right? It's up to you on how you want to communicate your transportation guidelines. And the same for postpartum doulas. If you're working with a family, let's say they just had a C-section and, they can't really lift the car seat but need to go to pediatrician's appointment. Are you driving them to the pediatrician appointment? Or are you just going to help them load the car and meet them there? And meet them, you drive, they drive, and you meet them at the pediatrician's appointment. So you want to be clear on your transportation guidelines. Um, and the same with childcare or sibling care. Believe it or not, I've run into situations where, I have a client, I'm working with them, and all of a sudden, you know, and this is where postpartum or birth planning comes into play too. But they were saying, oh, well, I have a toddler and I don't want my toddler to come with me for my birth, but I want my doula there or my husband there, but I would prefer my husband. So, doula, can you stay and watch my toddler? Right? So, you want to be clear on what your expectation is for childcare or sibling care. And the same for postpartum doulas. So let's say, you agree to care for a client's child, baby or toddler or what have you. What are your guidelines for that? I know some doulas who say, I'm able to watch your child, but an adult needs to be in the home, right? An adult needs to be in the home. They could be sleeping, they could be doing other things, but they need to be present while I'm watching the kids, right? So that's what they folded into their contract. They do not agree to watching a child without an adult present. Um, and then decision-making expectations, right? So, and as doulas, we don't tell our clients what they should or should not do. That's not our role. And truthfully, that's not empowering them to, stand in their own strength, stand in their own power, right? We're not here to make decisions for them. Um, as a trusted member of their support team, they may look to us for guidance. They may look to us for support, but by no means should we say, you know what? You need to do X, Y, and Z, right? We could say, how do you feel about X, Y, and Z? Okay, based on what you're telling me, you prefer A. That's what you keep saying. Like, you are telling me option A, right? That's what a doula does. We're reflecting, helping them to kind of figure out and come alongside them during decision making, but by no means telling them what they should or shouldn't do. And that kind of goes back to the hat wearing that we talked about. What hat are you wearing as their support person? So, um, so how do you feel about limits to practice?
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the most important sections. Just setting clear expectations and boundaries so that there isn't like any confusion or space for, error, it could be like refer back to our contract. It's not like, you know, there is no case by case. Like these are the guidelines and we're sticking to them type thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. I think especially when it comes to postpartum as well, because I mean, when I was with my client, she was asking like, "Oh, can you help me clean? Can you?" And at first, I was like, "Oh, well, it's not what I pictured, but this is what she actually needs help with doing dishes for her. She can't bend, like, you know what I mean?" So, especially, I've heard some stories about sibling care. So yeah, this is very important. I don't even know how to write it up though to be like nice. Like, hey, I'm I I don't know. I can do sibling care. But I do like the idea of making sure somebody, an adult, is in the home as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as like cleaning, I didn't think about that part.
Mm.
I mean, I'll clean your dishes, but we're not scrubbing no Timbs over here.
Right.
But
Yes, it's true.
light cleaning, in common areas type of thing, like the living room, the dining room, the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not cleaning your room, your bedroom.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly. Because light cleaning can mean different things to different people, you know? Does
yeah.
light mean, you're just folding clothes, or does light mean you're washing and folding clothes, right? So it's something to think about. And, I'm happy to walk through some like wording, or we could kind of workshop the wording on that too, if that's something you like.
Mhm.
Okay, so we talked about doula obligations. Now let's talk about client obligations. So your contract should include what you are expecting from your client, right? Because this is a relationship. It's a give and a take. It's a two-way street. So they're going to have to show up, if they want to fully engage and benefit from your services, right? So, client obligations, some doulas require birth prep or childbirth education classes as a part of their services, right? So, if you want me as your doula, I'm expecting you to take a comprehensive childbirth ed class, either with me at that, that's separate, or with another vendor or whatever. Um, so what are your expectations on this? Um, Now there are some benefits and, pros and cons to an expectation like that because, truthfully, as birth doulas, we have a limited amount of time and resources to educate our clients. And so taking that comprehensive class is going to allow them to better engage in your care, right? Um, then we have honesty, right? Honesty is the best policy. And so, this also comes to, creating a safe place for clients to be vulnerable and to be honest. Because, birth, postpartum, it's a very vulnerable time. It's a very vulnerable time. Um, and so honesty or encouraging, expecting your client to be honest with you is important. And then we have timely communication. Um, so what are you expecting when it comes to responses from your client, right? Do you want that check-in after prenatals? Um, what, how do you want to be contacted for a birth? Things like that. And it's also important to outline that they take responsibility for their decisions, right? As simple as that sounds, um, you're just saying you're an adult, right? You are the adult. You are the one driving this ship when it comes to decision making. Um, and as your doula, I'm here to support you, whether those decisions change or not. And then we go over the transportation again and some clarifications of your limits. So this is a good time to put in what you expect from your clients.
Now, in the case of, because I like that, because I actually feel like kind of going through that right now. So like I kind of been sending message, checking up on her, and she hasn't texted me back. And I'll wait like a couple of days, but I'm not gonna like keep blowing up your phone. But it
Mm.
also like um, you know, it's like if I'm not having continuous communication with you throughout the process, like how do you expect me to just show up at your birth, type of thing. So like at one like in what case where you would you have to like I don't know, would this reach a point to where you have to like dismiss yourself from being a doula if you haven't had like continuous communication with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in my experience, I have found that for clients who are not putting any upfront cost towards their doula care, so they're being paid directly from insurance or Mass Health or Medicaid,
Right,
um, they don't have skin in the game. Let's face
right,
it, it's no dollars off their back, right?
right,
And so it makes it a little bit easier to disengage whenever they want or engage whenever they want because it's no risk to them
right,
monetarily. I do find that in those cases. In the private pay arena as a doula, I almost never run into that because
right,
these clients they're paying you out of their own pocket, and so they're like, I'm getting my money's worth, so I'm
right,
going to hold at my end. Um, Unfortunately, when it comes to the Medicaid model, doulas are the ones holding all of the monetary risk when it comes to patients who disengage. And so something to consider, is so through Mass Health, you're essentially fee for service, right? You provide the service, then you bill, right? But with doula support, like if I agree to take on a client and now I'm blocking out a whole month for their due date, I've said no to other clients because now my calendar's full because I said yes to this client. I've, arranged for childcare for my kids for when they have their baby. I have arranged with my employer to take time off from work so that I'm present for their birth. Like you're putting up a lot to support them. So, um, sadly, the Mass Health model doesn't account for that monetary value of promised support for birth, only for actual support for birth. That's what you can only bill for. So for clients who fall into this scenario, I have a three strikes you're out approach, right?
Right.
So I will call, leave a voicemail if I can, Then I will call and text. I'll
Uh-huh.
call, leave a voicemail and text. And then I will call again, text, and leave an email. So that's my 1, 2, 3. And after the third attempt, if I'm still hearing crickets, then I will call, text, email one last time and say, you know, um, Miss Mary Joan, it's been a pleasure supporting you so far. I have not heard any communication from you at this point. Um, if I don't hear a response by X amount of, X date, I will assume that you have found care elsewhere and will disengage in doula care. So folding in language like that into your client or into your contract can be helpful, so that they are clear. Like if you're not engaging, if you're not communicating after these three strikes, which I think is very generous, then it's safe to say, like, I'm going to free up, your birth. Like, I'm going to take on another client because now that's lost dollars on your end, if that makes sense. Does that help you?
Yeah, it does. Yep. It
It's
does.
it's it's pretty cutthroat, but it's business, right? You're being
Yeah, no,
professional. You're being professional, and yeah.
yeah, no, that's fair because, then you're taking away from other money that you should be making and all that stuff. And yeah,
hmm And this is also where a really strong consultation comes into place because you want to work with clients who want to work with you. So, even when you're interviewing for clients, right? Yes, you want their business. Yes, you want to support them. That's all well and good. But do they really want the support? Like, are you going to get the call at 2 a.m. to support them and not feel any animosity? You know, like you have to be comfortable with working with them, and they have to be comfortable with working with you. Um, so we're trying to find the right client is also an important piece to this.
yeah, true.
Okay, so let's talk about special circumstances. A lot can happen, especially with birth. Plans might change. No one anticipates having an undesired outcome. So this is a good time to talk about the what if scenarios and have a plan, right? Um, so what is going to happen if you miss a birth, right? Um, Now, missing a birth can fall under three categories, right? It could be the client's fault, meaning they did not contact you or they didn't contact you in a timely manner. And so because you had no knowledge that they needed support, you could not support. What's going to happen in a situation like that? What's going to happen if it's your fault, right? So let's say, um, you know, you had that really important meeting and you couldn't get the time off from work. And so you missed their birth because of a personal thing or another obligation. What's going to happen? Or what if it's no one's fault? What if genuinely no one is at fault? Like, for example, it's a pandemic, right? This happened quite a bit in COVID, you know. All of a sudden there's a lockdown, right? And hospitals' policies change, allowing only certain number of people or what have you. What if there's limitations to doulas arriving based off hospital policy or government policy or regulations? Or what if they have a precipitous labor, meaning their labor comes fast, hard and fast? We call them butter babies. They just slip right out, right? What happens if there's a precipitous labor and you get there and baby's already born? So this is a time to start planning ahead on what that looks like. You know, do you want to offer a refund? Do you not want to offer a refund? Do you want to extend postpartum support to account for a missed birth, regardless of whose fault it is? Um, so these are times to kind of flush that out. Uh, and you also want to think of adjustments to doula support in the event of an undesired outcome. Like, for example, a preterm birth. You know, if you have in your contract that, you know, you're going to go on call at 37 weeks, but there's an emergency and baby's born by C-section at 34 weeks, you weren't necessarily planning to be on call at 34 weeks. So what can your client expect from you? Any questions on special circumstances?
No.
No.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about cost. Terms of the agreement, money, money, money. You know, we all want to be paid. I want you to be paid. Um, there is a huge debate, you know, in the doula-dom about doulas working for free. And that is a personal decision. If you decide to offer doula support for free, you know, there certainly is a market for that. But all of that to say is that at the very least, you should be compensated for your expenses, because your time is valuable. You as a person are valuable. And when clients put up some upfront costs, they're more likely to engage. So as you start your doula journeys, it may be tempting to accept free birth support or agree to a free birth for the sake of experience. But I would say you are more than that. You are worth more than that. And at a very minimum, have your expenses covered, right?
Yeah, that's kind of like where I'm at. At first, I was like, "Oh, I'll take her on just to get the experience, whatever." But I can already see like, um, that at least that for sure I'll include having my expenses paid for.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
indeed. So, um, so for I'll speak personally. So with my contracts, I have different terms of agreements because I have different forms of or revenue streams. So I work independently, so I have my own independent rate. So if someone's paying out of pocket, there is a rate. And then we have a rate if someone is if I'm being compensated through Mass Health or Medicaid. So I would encourage you to show your charges. So let's say, so for a Mass Health doula provider, you are compensated at $100 an hour. So even if that money is not being coming directly out of that client's pocket in the contract, I put it in there. I want them to know like what I'm being paid. Like this is what my time is worth through your insurance. Um, I think communicating your value also goes a long way on your contract as well. So showing the full charge of services. Um, so for me personally, um, and this kind of goes down to the bottom point with the green bottle method, which I'll get to in a bit. But I have a sliding scale. So, I didn't become a doula to get filthy rich. So there are times where I adjust my pricing because I have a client who truly needs the support and I truly want to engage in supporting them, but cost is a barrier. So I adjust my pricing on a sliding scale that meets their budget, and I'm still being paid and my expenses are still being met. So if there is a discount, I will still list the discount or the scholarship. So, if you are charging $2,000 for a birth, but this family can only pay 1,000, I still include my services are 2,000. You are receiving a $1,000 discount and you still owe me $1,000, right?
Okay.
So that is another way of you communicating your value. Keep the money on paper. Like it didn't just disappear, if that makes sense. Um, you also want to communicate how you want to be paid, right? So make it easy for clients to pay you. Are you accepting cash? Do you do a type of virtual payment system? If you do accept Mass Health, I want to say, as a caveat, you want to include permission to bill in your contract, either in the contract or as a separate document. So make it easy for them to pay you. List your payment methods on the contract so they can click a button on that PDF and pay you directly. You also want to talk about deposits and when you want to be paid. So this also varies doula to doula. So as a standard, most doulas who work privately require some form of a deposit that's put in the contract so that their birth or their postpartum service is secured on your calendar. And then the remaining balance of your fee needs to be paid by X amount of time, right? So it's up to you to decide, is that deposit going to be 30%, 50%? You know, how much of a percentage of the deposit needs to be shown up front? And then decide when you want that final fee to be paid. Is the final fee being paid when they're term? Is it when they have their third prenatal visit? Is it after the birth? Is it at the postpartum visit? Be clear on when you want to be paid. Um, and this is also where doulas might differ in their practice. But do you offer refunds or are some of that fee non-refundable? And do you want a type of cancellation clause in your contract, right? Do you have like an escape? If you need to escape or your client needs to escape this relationship for whatever reason, that there's a way out, right? So it's very personal on how you do it, whether you have refunds or no free runs or cancellation policies, but you want to figure out what works for you in your practice. And then we have the green bottle method. Have any of you heard of the green bottle method?
I haven't, but I have a quick question.
No.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Have you experienced where like I'm sure you haven't, but I'm just saying, like where they haven't been like you know, after the fact they're saying that they're not satisfied with service and they ask for a refund. Like, have you ever encountered that?
So I do not offer. So personally, in my contracts, I have a little escape clause, like a cancellation clause, because even for me, like I want to give myself the freedom to be like, this was a good run, but after engaging with you, I don't know if I'm the right doula for you. So I do put in kind of a cancellation clause in my contract. But all of that to say is that um, once services are rendered, there is no refund, right? So if I wanted to quote cancel or escape, or the client want to cancel or escape, it needed to be done before I go on call. That's what I put in my contract. Because that works for me, and that's what I want from my business. Um, but I have not gotten to a point where you know, a client was unhappy with the services they received, and requested a a refund. It does happen, it does happen. And this is to why having a solid contract and not just handing it to clients, but really going through it with a fine-tooth comb and even sitting down and reading it with them is so, so, so important. Um, um, and that can help prevent the situation of them not being happy with their services, if that makes sense. But all of that to say, there are some people who truly just won't be happy with your services. And if they request a refund, you can just say no, right? It's really up to you. No, I gave you this service. I apologize that you're unhappy for X, Y, and Z. I'm open to your feedback, to share your feedback so that I'm a better doula and can provide better services to future families. Um, but no, no, I gave you my time. I gave you my effort. No refund.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Or if you want to cave in and say, yes, I will give you a refund. There is no right or wrong. There's just a left or right. And what works for you and your business. Put it on paper.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to bring up the green bottle method. Because it's a good tool to use for those who may need some form of a sliding scale. So the green bottle method has to do with financial privilege, right? So we all have lived a privileged life in our own way. So financially, this is a tool you can or cannot use to help determine what your sliding scale is. So with this method, it has, you have 3 bottles. One bottle is completely full. So this is a client who truly does have quite a bit of financial privilege, right? If they can answer yes to these questions, I am comfortably able to meet all of my basic needs. I have reliable access to health care. I can always buy new items. I can afford multiple vacations to take time off for leisure. Okay, you're living a pretty financially privileged life. I think you can afford full price. And then you have tier 2, where yes, they have some privileges, but still might have struggles. So I have access to healthcare. I might have access to financial savings. I have some expendable income. I may have some debt, but it doesn't prohibit um, you fulfilling your basic needs. I can travel annually without financial burden. So it's kind of a half full, half empty, half bottle. And then on tier 1, this is someone who truly does not have much financial privilege. So I rent lower end properties or have unsustainable housing. Um, I am supporting children, elders, and others who are dependent on me. I have no access to savings. All right. I have very little expendable income. So this could be a tool for you to help gauge financial privilege and also a tool to help identify a sliding scale. So you could say, all right, so for clients who are in tier 2, I'm going to offer a 30% discount. For clients in tier one, I'm going to offer a 50% or whatever you might discount you want to offer. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think about that tool?
I
So,
know that there was a name to it, but I had already in my mind that like, you know, like at one point I want to get to where at I wouldn't say like a free service to underserving um families, but like maybe like a partial or for that particular circumstance.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm at a point now in my career where um, I have some clients who, you know, were particularly generous, even above and beyond what I expected when it comes to payment for services. And I save that in a little fund for when I have a client who is in tier one and I can offer that scholarship. Um, so
Yeah,
balancing it out. Yeah.
that's
Okay, great. So any other questions on terms of agreement?
um, a question about costs, because I know there's different costs. What's the average, like a typical cost you would charge a client, a private client here? I tried looking it up online, but it's just everybody's just so different. I just don't know how to go about choosing.
It is true. It is true. Everyone is different. So in Massachusetts, and I'm only speaking from my own experience of what I have seen as a doula and experienced as a doula in this state. Doula services privately range anywhere from $500 per client to 2,000 plus per client. 2,000 is kind of like on the higher end. Um, so middle of the road is around the 1,500 to 2,000 range ish. That's where the majority of kind of the market value is for doula care right now. Um, so, pricing is also very personal too. I think, please don't sell yourself short when it comes to pricing because you are worth that. You are worth it. You are a professional and your cost should reflect that. And truly, when clients see that cost, that value is also communicated too, if that makes sense. Um, so for doulas who are just starting out professionally and maybe don't have as much experience, it's usually on the lower end, around the $500 range. If you're the one as the primary doula. Um, and then for doulas who are more experienced, and even the word experience, they're like, what does that even mean? Because everyone's definition of experience also differs too. Like, for example, there are doulas who have birthed themselves. And because of that, say, I'm experienced. I've been there. I've done it. And there are doulas who say, no, I've never had a baby, but I've supported two births. So I'm experienced. And there are some who say, well, if you haven't had 50 births, you're not experienced. So even that is, you know, um, it varies in definition. Um, so all of that to say is charge what you feel you're worth, and at the very least cover your expenses. Um, and yeah, that's what I would say. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, so the 500 would be as like a whole compared to like how Mass Health would pay up to like 1,700. Is that what
Yeah,
it is?
so
Okay.
So mass health, so mass health, if you're being paid by mass health, it does not matter how much experience you have. If you have gone either the training route to be credentialed or the experience pathway route to be credentialed, you have a flat rate regardless of how many births you have on your belt, right? But working privately is a different scenario. Not all clients are willing to pay the same rate for a client who, quote, meets their expectation of experience. So, and again, this also goes back to having a strong interview session or consultation with your clients and getting their definition of what they feel is experienced, right? Because that can impact how they perceive your value and whether it's worth it to them to pay what in a fee out of pocket. So typically, I have seen on the lower end for newer doulas who are looking for experience, and they're charging a base fee of $500 just to cover expenses, ranging up to the 2,000 plus mark. Now, another thing to consider too is what type of client you're trying to attract, and what does that demographics, accessibility to funds look like, right? So for me in my private practice, I have noticed that every year I increase my price. I am working a little bit less with the demographic I wanted to work with, right? So this is where balancing kind of your books and your client load goes hand in hand because, if my desire is to work with Haitian immigrants who just moved to this country, don't know the language, don't know the culture, don't have employment, they're not going to be able to pay, they're not going to be in that top tier, right? So I balance it out with, how many clients I have that are able to pay full price and some who are not able to pay full price and how I'm willing to balance my client load monetarily.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. These are good questions. Okay. Okay, so supporting documents to go along with your contract. Having a release for information, so including with your contract kind of permission to document, right? Or even permission to share. Like, for example, if you are folding in backup doula support, um, explicitly say, if you take me on, are you okay if I share your intake form with the backup doula? Like, they need to know a little bit about you and our conversations together so they have context to support you. Do I have information? Do I have your permission to share? Or let's say you're working towards certification and your certification packet requires documentation of a birth. Do you have their permission to document their birth and submit it for certification? Like, some people may or may not be comfortable with that. So having some type of release to, say, yes, I'm going to be documenting about our time together. And is it okay if I share it with these limited groups of people? And then we have a release of liability. So a release of liability form is, we talked about protection and litigation. And truthfully, there are patients who do take legal action against their medical provider or their team of providers at time of birth. Having a release of liability is another form of protection, especially if you don't have insurance, doula insurance. This form, it's essentially saying, hey, I'm your doula, I'm not your doctor. If you decide to take legal action against your medical team, that excludes me. That excludes me. And then we have a social media release form. Some clients want you to take pictures do and if you want to hold on to those photos or keep those photos or take quotes or take testimonials or post a photo of them on your Instagram, because it was such a beautiful birth, you know, do you have their permission or not have their permission to do that? And who owns that photo, right? Is that photo now yours, or does that photo still belong to them? So having some type of a release form when it comes to social media is important as well. Any other questions on supporting documents?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. All right. We made it. We made it. So, yeah. So, if there's any last minute questions I can answer for you, or I'm this is your time to share. You both asked quite a bit of good questions already. And I hope that this was helpful for you as you plan out your contracts and begin to engage with clients. I want to protect you. I want you to be protected. It's a crazy world out there, y'all. So having a contract is one step towards doing that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chantel. This was actually really helpful.
Great.
Chantal, when you like first generated your first initial contract, did you like purchase a template or did you use like ChatGPT or some?
Yeah. So I did not. You can um you can have your contract written up by a legal professional. I know there are some doulas who do that, and I have a few resources. I have to dig them up, but there is a lawyer in the birth doula community who in Massachusetts who has a background in doula support and has a legal background and supports doulas with creating legally solid contracts. So by all means, if you want to consult a lawyer, I do encourage that. If you're able to do that, go for it. For me personally, I did not. I took, what I was able to find online and through it just flat out experience, I've been a doula now for a few years and my contract is a living document. I update it, I adjust, I tweak based off of my interactions with clients and based off of where I am in life, like for example, I was a doula when my second child was born. So 3 months after he was born, I kind of took a dive back into doula work, and I put in my contract that, I'm going to take pumping breaks. So if I'm at your birth, you can expect me in a corner, with my electric pump and a cover, and I'm going to sit there and pump, because I'm a nursing mother. I put it in my contract. So I was explicit, so they knew exactly what to expect, right? My son is now no longer nursing, so now that clause is out. So, your contract, it's a living document. You can add, edit, change, update as you see fit and as your life circumstances fit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Okay. All right. Well, we didn't get into intake forms, but maybe we can plan for that another time. But thanks so much for hopping on this call.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Chantel. Really, I
yeah,
appreciate it.
Helpful.
yeah, you're very welcome. All right. Have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.